So you'll be punching it up?
I can. Tell me what you want up.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special meeting of the West Goshen Township Board of Supervisors. To start the meeting, will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is going to be dedicated to Hearing 1-2023, which is a conditional use hearing for the construction of an assisted living facility and mini warehouse self-storage facility in the C3 Limited Highway Commercial Zoning District. Before we start the hearing, there is an opportunity for public comment, so I'll get to that in a minute. But please be aware this meeting is being live streamed on the Township YouTube channel, and the meeting may also be audio or video recorded by someone present in the room. So just before we start the hearing, is there anyone attending who has a new item of business for the board or a question or comment to staff? Again, this is not related to the hearing. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to speak during that. This is just for any new business that anyone would like to raise at this time. Very good, then we'll be ready to start the hearing, at this point I'm going to turn proceedings over to our solicitor, Ms. Kristen Kemp.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce exhibits and give a little bit of background. So the applicant is Branchport Capital LLC. They're seeking conditional use approval pursuant to section 84-24 I-1 and I-2 of the West Goshen Township zoning ordinance, as it was recently amended, to use property at 943 South High Street, and that comprises 3 different tax parcel numbers: 52-7-29, 52-7-29.2, and 52-7-29.3. They propose to remove the existing Quality Inn hotel that's there and develop an assisted living facility and a mini warehouse self-storage building on the property. The property is located in the C3 district, and as I said, it's currently improved with a Quality Inn hotel. There are different exhibits I'd like to mark on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, mainly to demonstrate compliance with the state requirements for conducting a conditional use hearing. First is the actual application, Board Exhibit 1. The conditional use application was dated May 2nd, 2023, but it was not received in the Township office until May 9th, 2023. The second exhibit was the conditional use plan that accompanied the application. It was dated March 27th, 2023, prepared by E.B. Walsh & Associates or Edward B. Walsh & Associates, and it consists of 7 different sheets. The third exhibit is an aerial tax map of the property. The 3 parcels are outlined in red. Board Exhibit 4 is an email from the applicant's counsel, Mr. Colagreco, dated May 22nd, 2023, granting the board an extension of time to hold the hearing. Under the state law, the board is required to hold the hearing within 60 days of receipt of application, and due to scheduling difficulties and it being summertime, Mr. Colagreco and the applicant agreed to allow us to hold it tonight. D5 is a proof of publication. Tonight's hearing had to be advertised for 2 consecutive weeks in the Daily Local News, and that happened on June 26th and July 3rd, 2023. The 6th exhibit is an affidavit of posting and photographs of the posting that occurred on June 21st, 2023. The state law requires that any property which is subject to conditional use be posted with notice of the public hearing, and that was done. Board 7 is a letter from the Township Manager, Chris Bayshore, dated June 21, 2023, that was sent to neighboring property owners, and that exhibit also has a list of people that received that notice of tonight's hearing. Board 8 is the Planning Commission meeting minutes from their meeting of June 13th, 2023. The Township ordinance requires that Planning Commission review conditional use applications and give their recommendations to the board. That occurred June 13th, and the Planning Commission, their motion was to accept the conditional use application with the recommendation for applicant to consider pedestrian safety and possible subscription to EMS services. Board Exhibit 9, the letter dated July 3rd, 2023 from Westtown Township to West Goshen Township. And Board 10 is the Chester County Planning Commission review letter of June 16th, 2023. And the final board exhibit is a memo from Andrea Testa, the Township Fire Marshal, to the Township Manager, dated July 6, 2023. Mr. Colagreco, I had shared with you this exhibit list. Do you have any objection to the admission of these 11 exhibits?
No.
Okay. Just to explain, if anybody in the audience has not attended a conditional use hearing, a conditional use is a use that the board, through its zoning ordinance, has determined is appropriate in the C3 district, subject to this public hearing process, subject to property owners who own or rent property in close proximity being given an opportunity to be recognized as parties, and we'll get to that in a second. The applicant has to demonstrate compliance with the ordinance standards. So if the applicant goes through the criteria of the ordinance and demonstrates that it can meet those criteria, then the board has an obligation to accept the conditional use. Right now I'm going to ask if anybody in the audience who you have to own or lease property in close proximity. Close proximity is not defined with a set specified distance, but basically within a distance that you'd be impacted by the development. So if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to be recognized as a party, I would ask that you come forward and fill out the form that I have. Okay, Mr. Altshaw is here in his capacity as manager of Westtown Township. Mr. Altshaw, you're requesting that Westtown Township be granted party status?
Yes, I am, and I just note that this matter has not been discussed. Whether to ask for apply for party status has not been discussed by the Westtown Board of Supervisors, but we plan to do so at our next public meeting. So essentially, I'm going to ask my board to grant the retroactively approved me seeking party status from the township.
Okay, Mr. Colagreco, do you have any objection to Westtown being recognized as a party?
No.
Okay. So, board, are you okay with Westtown being recognized as a party then?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously subject to the Board of Supervisors ratifying that action. Anybody else in the audience that wishes to be recognized as a party? Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Colagreco. He will provide his witness testimony. We'll give an opportunity for the board to then ask questions of the witnesses. If anybody has a general question, we'll also give you an opportunity just to ask that question of the witness. We'll see where we end. If tonight we finish the hearing, the board will have 45 days to render a written decision. If we don't finish the hearing, we'll have to pick another date to come back. So with that, let's turn it over to Mr. Pellegreco.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. Luke Pellegreco, representing the applicant. Good evening. One of the points I'd like to get established early on is when I present my witnesses, and I will have 4 witnesses to present, I don't know what the township's preference is for questioning those witnesses. My preference would be that we put on all of our testimony first and then make our witnesses available for questioning after that, because I found that many times questions are asked of a particular witness, which another witness really has the answer to later on in the testimony. So my only question is from a procedural perspective, it doesn't make sense for everybody to just hold their questions until we put on our 4 witnesses, and then they'll all be available for appropriate questioning. I think it'll make things go a lot smoother.
That's fine with me, with other board members.
Yeah, just make sure you take notes of what your questions are, because I would forget mine, and audience as well. If you have questions, write them down and they'll get answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I pre-marked 17 exhibits that the applicant will speak to tonight, and as we come across them, I'll have them appropriately identified and marked. We have 4 witnesses: Sam Tarantini, the managing partner of Bridgeport Capital LLC, Steve Sussline, our civil engineer from E.B. Walsh and Associates, Alec Meisler of Traffic Planning and Design, our traffic consultant, and Jeremy Philo, our architect. He's going to speak to some renderings of what the proposed buildings on this property will look like. Ms. Camp did a very adequate job in representing what we're here for tonight, so I'm going to skip what my prepared speech was, because she already gave it, describing why we're here and what we're here for. So with that said, I'd like to have my first witness, Sam Tarantini, come forward and be sworn.
Raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God or so you affirm?
Yes.
Can you spell your last name for me?
T-A-R-A-N-T-I-N.
Thank you.
I thought this was a portable mic, but I think I was about ready to break your podium. Okay, it is portable. I'll speak loudly, and Sam can use the microphone for purposes of his presentation. Can everybody in the room hear me? Good, great, okay. Sam, for record purposes, can you identify yourself and your place of employment?
Yes, Sam Tarantini, and it's Bridgeport Capital LLC.
And what is your position with Bridgeport Capital LLC?
I'm a managing partner.
That's the direction you want.
Yep.
And you're authorized to appear and make representation at the hearing tonight on behalf of the applicant, correct?
Yes.
I've marked 2 exhibits, Exhibit A3 and Exhibit A4. Let's speak with them separately here. Exhibit A3 is a copy of the deed between Westchester Lodging LLC and 8 Stone Westchester LLC, dated September 15, 2016. And the purpose of introducing that deed is to establish the fact that 8 Stone Westchester LLC is the legal owner of the property, correct?
That is correct.
And by the property, we mean the property that's been identified in the application, as was explained by Solicitor Camp. Exhibit A4 is the redacted agreement of sale between dated June 1, 2020, and the First Amendment to that agreement dated August 7, 2022, between 8 Stones Westchester LLC and your company, Bridgeport Capital LLC, correct?
That is correct.
And it's through that document that you establish equitable ownership and the ability to make this application to the Board of Supervisors here this evening, correct?
Correct.
All right. Is Exhibit A5, and Brian, I don't know if you can punch that up on the screen for everybody to see, it's the existing property plan. It's already in the board's packet. Exhibit A5 is up on the screen here in the meeting room. The board has it in its meeting packet. Using that exhibit, and remember you're speaking to a stenographic record, so you're going to have to be particular in your description. Can you describe where the property is and what is on the property today?
The property is located in 943 South High Street, and it has a Quality Inn hotel with 141 rooms and approximately 272 spaces.
And what are the roads abutting the property?
It is Stanton and South Walnut.
And Route 202.
And Route 202, of course, yeah. The ramp, the entrance ramp to Route 202.
The property presently is comprised of 4 tax parcels, 3 of which are in West Goshen, and 1 of which is in Westtown Township. Is that correct?
Yes,
And the majority of the property is situated in West Goshen in the C3 zoning district, correct?
yes.
And do you know what the zoning designation of that portion of the property in Westtown Township is? C1?
C1.
Refresh your memory.
Yes, I mixed it up with the C3.
Okay, and are the improvements related to the current proposal before this board located primarily on those 3 parcels within West Goshen Township?
Yes,
Did you direct the preparation of Exhibit A6, which is the next exhibit there, Brian, the rendered site plan prepared by KMA Design Studio?
yes,
And that's, Exhibit A6 is what the board is now looking at on the screen in the meeting room, correct?
correct.
And that essentially is a rendered version, a colored version of the conditional use plan that was submitted to the township as identified by Ms. Camp in the township's exhibits and as identified in our own exhibits, correct?
Yes.
All right. Referring to that exhibit, can you please describe the proposed improvements for which you're seeking conditional use approval here this evening? You don't have to go into a lot of detail. We have a civil engineer who will do that. Just a 35,000-foot recitation of what that exhibit is showing to be developed on the property.
Sure. We have the 2 uses as described earlier. The assisted living building within the West Goshen side of the line, and abutting it is the self-storage building to the left.
All right, well, let's describe what's in the assisted living facility.
The assisted living facility will have 175 units composed of studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms. And the self-storage facility will be approximately 110,000 square feet of climate-controlled self-storage.
And the self-storage facility is a 4-story building, correct?
Yes,
And that's the building that's depicted on the northernmost portion of the property, correct?
that is correct.
And if I should say, this project is approved and as it goes through, the land development process, what will the ownership regime on that property be?
So that the common elements would be owned by a condo association, and then each use will be owned separately by a separate LLC.
All right, let me restate that. The site will be subject to a condominium regime.
That is correct.
There'll be 2 units on the site.
Correct.
1 unit for the self-storage and 1 unit for the assisted living.
Yes.
All right. But they won't be separately subdivided lots, correct?
Correct.
All right. One of the questions that came up when this application was before the Township Planning Commission a few weeks ago, and you see it in the minutes of the Township Planning Commission approval, or recommendation rather, was coordination with the Good Fellowship Ambulance and EMS Training Institute regarding some sort of condition to ameliorate the cost of emergency services that would be provided to the assisted living facility. You were at that meeting, correct?
Yes.
And you have been in contact back and forth with the Good Fellowship for many, probably months and weeks and most recently days regarding this issue, correct?
Yes.
And to cut to the chase, are the proposed conditions that are agreeable to the applicant and Good Fellowship Ambulance provided as Exhibit A7 in the board's packet, which I handed up earlier this evening.
Yes.
And the board can
leave that in its leisure. If there's questions about that, Mr. Terrence, you can respond to them at the appropriate time. I don't have any further questions, Mr. Terrence. I'd like to move on to my civil engineer for the next phase of questions.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or so you affirm?
I do.
Can you state your name and business address for purposes of the record?
Certainly. Stephen Sauceline of Edward B. Walsh and Associates, 855 Springdale Drive, Exton, Pennsylvania.
And you are the civil engineer that you retained to prepare the conditional use plan for this application as well as the land development application that has accompanied it, correct?
That's correct.
I've attached your CV as Exhibit A15. I'll let the board do that at its own leisure, but suffice it to say you are a licensed professional engineer in the Commonwealth, is that correct?
Correct.
And you have been accepted as an expert in civil engineer and testified before various other local zoning boards and municipal bodies throughout this region, correct?
I have.
And you're familiar with the subject property and the ordinances of West Goshen Township?
I am.
I would request that Mr. Saltzline be admitted as an expert witness in civil engineering for purposes of his testimony this evening.
Fine with me.
Thank you.
Okay. Were you responsible for the preparation of Exhibit A8, which is the actual conditional use plan, which is consisted of 7 sheets dated March 27, 2023?
Yes, I was.
Referring to Exhibit A8, if you can go to that, Brian, that's the black and white plan, conditional use plan. We're going to get a little bit more granular with you than we did with Sam. And I think that sheet there of Exhibit A8 is probably the sheet you need for most of your testimony.
Correct. That's conditional use site plan.
Okay. And that's how it's labeled in the package?
Site improvement plan, correct.
Super. Okay, using that exhibit, could you kindly advise with more specificity as to the size of the 2 proposed buildings?
Sir.
As proposed right now.
Certainly. There is the assisted living facility. It's approximate 52,870 square foot building consisting of 4 stories. And then there is the self-storage facility, which has a footprint of approximately 29,290 square feet, which is also 4 stories.
And as we discussed before the Planning Commission, one of the benefits of this conditional use application is that actually a reduction in the amount of impervious coverage that it would be ultimately built on the what we'll call the quality in property, correct?
That's correct. We reduce approximately 8.7% over the 6.55 acres from 61.4% to say 52.7. That's primarily accomplished through the extensive parking that exists today that supports the quality in.
Yeah, let's speak to the parking requirements because that, as you just stated, that's where you're really picking up your diminution in impervious coverage. What are the parking requirements, as you understand it, for the self-storage facility and for the assisted living facility? And you have to walk over there and look at your plan. Feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you. I think I have it. The assisted living facility, as Mr. Tarantini had mentioned, has 775 beds. The ordinance requires 1/2 parking space per bed, which rounds to 88 required spaces. The proposed site plan shows 123 parking spaces. The self-storage facility is 1 space per 10,000 gross floor area, of which we require 11 spaces, and we propose 12 for 135 spaces.
And although it hasn't been determined conclusively at this stage of planning, there is the possibility that the parking may be reduced even further as the plan goes through land development, correct?
That's correct. We have an abundance of parking shown.
That's a to be determined. Suffice it to say, for purposes of this record, the plan shows compliance with the parking requirements of the ordinance for self-storage and assisted living.
That's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about the stormwater management as well. Does sheet 5 of Exhibit A8, I'm going to ask you to see if you can find sheet 5, Brian, show the proposed stormwater improvements attendant to the redevelopment of the property?
It does. That's it there, Brian. We are proposing a new stormwater collection, conveyance, and management facility to replace the existing storm sewer system that supports the Quality Inn. Within it, there's a series of 5 subsurface stormwater management facilities. Each of those facilities both recharge and attenuate stormwater runoff in accordance with your municipal ordinance, county, and state requirements. All of the facility, there are 3 discharge points that surround the project area. We maintain those discharge points and reduce stormwater runoff to each of those points. Very quickly, it's important to note that given that it's a redevelopment project, your ordinance calls for an automatic 40% reduction to existing impervious surfaces. That is to say, the pre-developed runoff rate is essentially reduced by 40%, to which we have to meter our proposed stormwater runoff. So at the end of the day, when you look at the stormwater calculations that were provided as part of the application, there is a reduction anywhere from the more frequent storms to the less frequent storms of, say, 75% to 12%. Now, when you factor in that automatic 40% reduction, it's amplified even further in terms of a reduction.
A lot of that just went over my head, but it sounded pretty good. I'm going to ask you a more simple question. Back when the Quality Inn was built, back in 1971, back when it was approved, were there stormwater management facilities installed, required at that time?
There were. I can't speak to the requirement, but in the general area of the self-storage facility in this area here, there's a subsurface stormwater management basin, or system, I should say. We didn't assess it associated with the ordinance, but we did a quick analysis, and as I said, the 40% reduction that your ordinance requires takes it beyond that which is released today. So it was somewhat of an antiquated system. The rationale that's used today generates higher volume storms, higher runoff rates. So our proposed stormwater management system it greatly improves stormwater management.
And suffice it to say, the regulations in place 50 years ago don't hold a candle to what the current DEP regulations and township regulations are for managing stormwater.
That's safe to say, yes.
Is it safe to conclude that whatever stormwater may be leaving the property now, uncontrolled, will be controlled by virtue of these new stormwater management requirements?
Correct, both rate and volume.
And although I'm not going to ask you to go through it because you just tangentially touched on it, you did prepare Exhibit A9, which is the stormwater management narrative, which is required to be submitted with the conditional use application, right?
I did.
Now, if we were to spend 2 hours going through that, your conclusion would be the same as it was that you just testified to, correct?
That's accurate.
There are a few conditional use standards right from the ordinance that I have to ask you, so some of these questions may seem awkward, but I'm taking them right out of the requirements of the West Goshen Township ordinance. Maybe think of a more clever word.
For both.
Well, I'll let the board judge. Have you had the opportunity to review the conditions for approval, or the conditions that are required to be proven in the conditional use application for approval of a conditional use?
I have.
Will the buffer areas provided within the property effectively screen the proposed conditional use from adjoining uses of properties, whether similar or dissimilar in type and character? Now, I know buffer screening was a big part of the ordinance amendment that this board approved late last year. But what is your answer to that?
They will effectively buffer in accordance with the ordinance.
Okay. And do we have a plan that shows, if we wanted to go back to the site plan, maybe it shows where those buffers would be?
We actually do. I think it's the last sheet of the plan set.
Okay.
Sheet 6, I'm sorry.
Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. I'll speak first and foremost to existing vegetation. There is existing vegetation that resides along the Walnut Street frontage with the property, as well as a dispersed mixture of deciduous trees along the adjoining residential property, and a significant stand of trees along the Route 202 on-ramp. As part of the ordinance requirement, there is a 25-foot required buffer along all of the residential, adjacent residential properties, which is Walnut Street. I guess it would be the southern edge of the property and southeastern edge of the property up along the West Township line. And that buffer consists of a double row of evergreen trees, and we also include a privacy fence along a portion of the Walnut Street.
Isn't there also like a break in that buffer for an emergency access?
There is. There's emergency access approximately where the pointer is going, which is the center of the assisted living facility that we're going to maintain.
Okay, so that exists today and that will be maintained going forward, correct?
That's correct.
There is an exhibit in the board's package, Exhibit 810, which isn't part of this, Brian, if you could scroll through, which is an existing which shows the existing landscape buffer, and that might shed a little bit more clarity on the situation if you could punch that up.
Is that 810?
This one.
I think that is the exhibit.
Yep.
Yeah, it's 2 pages, it's 13 and 14, right?
That's fine, thank you. This shows, I spoke to the Walnut Street, existing vegetation that's kind of highlighted in the image, as well as the vegetation along the US Route 202 northbound on-ramp, and it's a little difficult to see, but in the rear of the existing, I should say the side of the existing Quality Inn, is sparse vegetation along the existing residential property.
And the plan is to keep that existing vegetation that you just identified during, as much as possible during the redevelopment of the property?
To the greatest extent possible, yes.
But will the existing landscaping be supplemented with additional landscaping as well as some fencing? I think you already testified to that, attendant to the proposed redevelopment.
That's correct.
Is the plan compliant with the applicable building, structure, parking, and street setbacks from adjoining properties as required by the zoning ordinance of West Goshen Township?
It is, and it's shown on the conditional use site improvement plan.
And you did submit an environmental impact assessment report in conjunction with this application as required by ordinance, correct?
Our office did, yes.
And that is marked as Exhibit A11, correct?
That's correct.
Is there adequate and effective public sewer and public water for domestic and fire supply?
To the best of our knowledge, it is. This project is a redevelopment of the existing commercial site, which is serviced by public sewer and domestic water and fire protection. We have prepared a sewage facility planning module and submitted it to the township, showing that our proposed flows are less than that which the Quality Inn or the hotel was planned for.
And are there adequate and available public sanitary sewer facilities to service the assisted living facility and self-storage facility? That's a little bit redundant. That's a follow-up question based on the ordinance criteria.
Again, yes, and that will be confirmed by the municipality.
We've already addressed stormwater runoff, but I'm going to ask you the specific question. Will there be any increase in surface water runoff at the boundaries of the premises beyond that runoff presently existing as required by state law and township regulations?
There will not, in accordance with the ordinance.
Let's talk about fire safety, because there's a letter that I think, well, that I know, that Ms. Camp marked as a board exhibit. The 11. Thank you. From Andrea
attest to the fire marshal, Chris Bayshore, dated July 6, 2023. You read that letter, correct?
I have.
And after you read that letter, what did you do?
I got on the phone with Ms. Tester, your fire marshal, set up an impromptu meeting, and went over some specifics of the review. Went down in our meeting, ran through some of the finer points, specifically emergency access along Walnut Street, which, as we previously stated, we're maintaining the existing emergency access. We will have a paver access that will interconnect with the internal drive aisles, which, again, it has to be vetted through the land development process if we're approved through conditional use by Ms. Testa. But in generality, she seemed comfortable with what we had proposed.
Well, I'm going to give you the memo so that you can address each one of her bullet points and just go through that.
Sure. The first bullet point of the memo dated July 6, 2023 speaks of emergency access. And in the memo, she discusses, in accordance with the fire code, we have to have access to all points of the building within 150 feet. By virtue of our inclusion of the emergency access lane and interconnection, we do have sufficient coverage to meet that demand.
Excuse me, do you want me to change to a different plan for it?
Yeah, is there exhibits that you want?
Not necessarily, because the memo that we're referring to came out following the conditional use plan. Some of the means and methods by which I sat down aren't necessarily detailed on the conditional use plan. And as I said, these points will be vetted and evaluated through the land development process. So
It might help to have A6, the rendered site
Okay.
plan up there, just so the board has some context. If you're referring to where the access is. and
that's
where
true in terms of the proposed building.
So if you put up that rendered drawing, there you go.
That'd be great.
Go ahead, keep going.
The second bullet point that she speaks of is specific to clearance. We have a portico share, and there's a minimum requirement for fire apparatus and emergency vehicles. That'll be also detailed in the land development process through the development of the architectural drawings. The third bullet point is specific to fire hydrants and public water service. There's an existing hydrant that exists on the site close to the, I guess it would be the southerly property line. We intend to extend that main to primarily service the self-storage facility. Through the extension of that main, we will also add a fire hydrant, generally speaking, in the area that is the northwest corner of the self-storage facility. We've submitted to Aqua Pennsylvania for a will serve letter. We've also requested a fire hydrant flow test so that we can ultimately design not only the main extension, but the internal workings of each of those buildings. The fourth bullet point speaks of the emergency access, where she indicates it'll be obsolete. She was not aware, and for the extent of the submission of the plans, we do show the retention of that emergency access, but we did not show the grass paver that comes off of that access in between the two buildings and interconnects with the drive aisles. So by virtue of explaining that further, also will be fully detailed on the land development plan. She was comfortable with that access, that now we do have the ability to access from two different points, as well as essentially circumnavigate the site.
So the area that's shown as green, light green, lime green, whatever, on that exhibit, will be grass. You said grass pavers, but it'll be stabilized to support the weight of emergency vehicles, correct?
Correct, and improved subgrade. The final point that she mentions is the turning movements. We did provide, as part of the conditional use plan set, a turning movement plan that shows both the movements of passenger vehicles, an ambulance, and a fire truck. I'm sorry, a fire truck and a WB-40 tractor trailer. What that plan lacks, it shows access coming into all points. Again, referring back to that 150-foot radius that's required to access the building. What it didn't show is the backing movement. If you pull in to any of these dead-end areas, you have the ability to back out. And we did that analysis, but we did not show it on the plan. Again, I reviewed that with your fire marshal to her general agreement. Again, that'll be more particularly detailed as part of a land development plan set.
So is it your opinion that following your meeting with the fire marshal that you were satisfied with your explanations of the bullet points raised in your correspondence?
She generally was, yes.
And these improvements, in your testimony, they would be picked up, whatever improvements she's going to require as the plans go forward will be picked up during the land development processing of this application?
Correct.
And you didn't hear any comments from her in your meeting or in that correspondence which would preclude development of the site plan in the general manner as being proposed here this evening, correct?
No, she was, generally speaking, happy with access through the site, and obviously it would have to be more fully vetted through land development.
And the fire marshal raised no concern about the height of the buildings and not having the ability to somehow service these buildings because of their height, correct?
No, the township has apparatus to reach 130 feet so that they could maintain access along Walnut Street as well as internally through the site.
Does the rendered, as long as we have the rendered site plan up there, the ordinance requires that we show safe and convenient pedestrian access and internal circulation within the grounds of the facility, especially as pertains to access from the parking areas to the various buildings. Can you briefly, using your pointer, depict on Exhibit 6 where the pedestrian connectivity is on this plan, where the sidewalks are, and how they function on this proposed development?
Certainly. Specific to the assisted living facility, first and foremost, we have two parking areas, a lower parking area and an upper parking area. Each of those parking areas has a direct connection through sidewalk or walkway system to the lower entrance of the building as well as the upper. The building itself proposes various courtyards for the units internal, in which we have a walkway system that goes around what would I consider the rear of the building, and it interconnects with the upper part of the building. We have facilities that take you from the satellite parking area on through to the building. The self-storage facility has a parking area that's adjacent to the Route 202 corridor, and that has a sidewalk connection to a planned entrance along the front of that building. There are no external sidewalks that go out to Stanton or Walnut, nor obviously the 202 on-ramp.
Is the proposed development complying with the area bulk requirements for the C3 district as set forth in section 84-25?
They are, and it's identified on the conditional use site improvement plan.
Okay, I'm not going to walk you through each one of them, but you suffice it to say at this stage of planning, you haven't identified the need for any variance relief from the zoning ordinance of this township to facilitate the proposed development, correct?
Correct.
Is the proposed redevelopment of the property complying with the design standards for the C3 district as set forth in section 84-26?
They are, and I'll very quickly run through some of those points in terms of screening. We discussed previously the screening that's proposed. Storage facility is self-explanatory for the self-storage facility itself, as well as there's a primary loading area and storage area to the assisted living facility. Landscaping, again.
By the way, let's take a step back, because this usually comes up in hearings involving storage. Is there any proposal for the outside storage of materials, boats, RVs, other things outside of the storage building?
There is not. Another point, landscaping, which is part and parcel to the buffering. We propose landscaping in accordance with the ordinance to manage the parking areas. Again, that's ordinance related. As we move forward in land development, it'll be further evaluated for aesthetics and over landscape, I'll state. Access and traffic control. We utilize the existing access off of Stanton Again, I referenced the fire marshal's memo, and we've strove to address those concerns. Interior circulation, we show through the various drive aisles that lead up to the parking areas, and again, the turning movement plan that I referenced to address those concerns. Lighting, we have looked at lighting in a general sense. We do not feel that there will be any need for relief from that. Essentially comply with dark sky standards throughout the site. In terms of loading, there are 2 loading areas, one specific for the assisted living facility and what would be the western edge of the assisted living, as well as the, I guess it would be the southern edge of the self-storage facility. Self-storage facility has a drive-in area also for loading. And the final requirement is parking, which I spoke to earlier.
And is the proposed redevelopment complying with the general standards for the C3 district as set forth in section 84-27 of the zoning ordinance?
They are.
In your opinion, in your professional opinion, does this application comply with the requirements for conditional use approval in West Goshen Township?
It does.
I don't have any further questions for this witness. I have 2 more witnesses, and we'll open ourselves up for questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alex?
You can raise your right hand.
Sorry.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or so you affirm?
I do.
Could you spell your last name for me, please?
Meitzler, M-E-I-T, Z as in zebra, L-E-R.
Thank you.
Alex, could you please state your place of employment and your involvement with this project?
My name is Alex Meitzler, work with traffic planning and design, 131 Continental Drive, Suite 103, Newark, Delaware. We are the traffic engineer related to the project.
And Exhibit A16 is your CV, correct?
Correct.
And are you a licensed engineer in the Commonwealth?
Correct. Yes, I am.
And, again, you've been accepted as an expert in traffic engineering and design before various local zoning boards and municipalities throughout southeastern Pennsylvania.
I have.
You're familiar with this property?
I am.
And you're familiar with the requirements of West Goshen Township and the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as pertains to traffic permitting for projects such as this, correct?
I am.
I request that Mr. Meitzler be admitted as an expert witness in traffic engineering.
Yes.
Thank you. Referring again to the exhibit that's up on the screen, which is the rendered site plan, tell us a little bit about how traffic circulation, what is the proposal for traffic circulation into the site, and both from a perspective of access and egress.
The access and egress to the site will be through the 2 existing driveways off of Stanton Driveway, I apologize, Stanton Drive. The location of these driveways is not proposed to move. Egress will be through the same driveways. I don't want to get into myself.
That's okay.
Although we have discussed for trucks and heavier vehicles that the access and egress be limited to the eastern driveway to allow for greatest amount of separation between again larger vehicles entering and accessing entering and egressing from the intersection with 202. Existing as existing left turns out of Stanton to southbound US 202 will continue to be prohibited and not allowed.
So there's no change being proposed to the access point from Stanton onto Route 202, correct?
Correct.
And the driveway access, what you're suggesting is that I guess that would be the westernmost driveway, the one on the bottom, the one closest to 202.
The one closest to 202
that would be restricted against truck access either entering or exiting the property, correct?
Correct.
All truck access would be directed to the easternmost driveway, correct?
Correct.
If that radii had to be adjusted after consultation with Westtown Township to accommodate the largest tractor trailer, the applicant is willing to do that, correct?
Correct. Those radii can be modified.
Was your office responsible for preparation of Exhibit A12, the traffic impact study?
Yes, we were.
Can you please provide a brief summary of the findings as set forth in detail in Exhibit A12?
As we stated earlier, in our conclusions, the existing access points to Stanton will be maintained, as well as the left turn egress to southbound 202 remains prohibited. We measured the site distance from Stanton Avenue to 202. It is from the eastern driveway. It is compliant. The existing western driveway, just due to its close proximity, just physically, it does not. But given the low speed of movements in and out of here, we do not see that there's any safety issue, nor is there any evidence of any accident history or safety issues at these driveways or locations. In addition, the low number of proposed AM and PM access and egress trips is a reduction in traffic intensity to the current use.
Well, let's get specific about that. I mean, in your report, you identified the projected AM and PM traffic generation for the self-storage and the assisted living facility. Can you summarize what those numbers are?
Sure. For the self-storage unit, we using the IT trip generation manual, we anticipate 10 total trips. When I speak to trips, a trip is either, it includes exiting and entering trips. 10 AM peak trips, 17 PM peak trips for the self-storage, and for the assisted living, 38 AM trips and weekday AM trips and 51 weekday PM peak trips.
And in your opinion, would the capacity of the road network providing access to this property lower the level of service beyond which it now exists at the property?
No, there will be no reduction in any kind of level of service and operations.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the interior traffic circulation. Although Steve did a pretty good job of walking through the driveways and this, that, and the other, I'm going to ask you, will the interior traffic circulation for the proposed use, including but not limited to internal driveways, be safe and convenient for visitors to the site and residents of the site, and emergency vehicles that have to access the site?
Yes, it will be.
And in your opinion, does this application comply with the conditional use requirements in the West Goshen Township zoning ordinance relating to traffic?
Yes, it does.
By the way, you referenced a slight modification, the potential of a modification of that easternmost driveway into the site. And I just want to make sure that we mark the appropriate exhibit, Exhibit A13, which is correspondence from myself to the Westtown Township Manager, Jonathan Altshell, dated July 11, 2023. And that document specifically states the applicant's proposal as pertains to adjusting that driveway, correct?
Correct, it does.
I don't want there to be any confusion or misunderstanding about that. I don't have any further questions for this witness. I have one more witness.
You'll take that.
You can raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, or so you affirm?
I do.
Can you spell your last name for me, please?
Philo.
Thank you.
Can you state your full name and business address for record purposes?
Yeah. Jeremy Philo, KMA Design Studio, 27 South Main Street, Ambler, Pennsylvania.
And Jeremy, you're a registered architect in the Commonwealth.
I am.
And you prepared a series of exhibits at the request of the applicant depicting what the proposed development of the property would look like should this development be approved, correct?
Correct.
And that's Exhibit 814, Brian, if you could pull that up, building and property renderings. And I will, for record purposes, state that Exhibit 14 consists of probably 6 plan sheets, and Jeremy will run through them and describe each one accordingly. I'm just going to let him speak to this without a whole lot of interfering from myself. So if there's another exhibit you would like rather refer to,
Yeah.
we'll start on 814.
Do you want to see if they'll accept me as an expert?
I don't think I need to.
Okay. I just like to hear that for my own personal pride.
I had the question. Mr. Architect. That's good enough.
Thank you. Yep. So I think I guess I'm the one that can go off script a little bit and try to create some three-dimensional color to what the plans are being proposed here. So we're lucky enough to design in this space for both senior living and for storage. So this is a project that's really exciting us. And we've worked with the project team to develop is all the things that you've seen on the site plan, and to create what we always recognize is the a place that's really going to be a home. It's going to be a residence. It's going to be a residence for mom and or dad as they live out their years. So it's about making a beautiful place, a comfortable place, and all those things. So the design that we've started to put together that's representational to the conditional use layout and all that is you see the first visuals here, and this first one is a rendering of the main entrance, which is we'll say the southeastern side, looking back towards the main entrance. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the 4-story portion that fronts 202 on the left-hand side of the image, which is over here, leading into that main central entrance and covered portico share that is the main drop-off and entry point for this community. And then the 3-story portion, which is to the right. And I say 3-story because, as we know, this site drops off. So that actually, as you walk around the site to the lower portion, becomes a 4-story section visually. But the idea here is that we're creating architectural interest with the use of different materials. We've got stone, we've got different siding types, we've got balconies that are giving dimension to the elevation, a lot of natural light. The assisted living building is set to the southern side of the site in the sort of long view, so it will take advantage of the southern light as much as possible. The storage building is set to the north side. That building does not require light, so in that way it works out very well for the program and the needs of the residents. If we could just jump to, there's a couple more views of the building in various ways. So here's another view. Now this is more as you drive in from the road, as you sort of make the first turn and turn towards the main entrance. This is, again, recognizing the view. The idea here is that, we're obviously emphasizing the front entrance. We want to make it identifiable, not in an aggressive way, but in a complimentary way. But that when you pull onto this site, you'll get a glimpse of that upon entering, and there'll be signage to direct you, but the architecture should pull you into that space naturally. Again, there's a lot of central amenity activity space for the residents contained around this entrance. Libraries, lounge space, dining, all those sorts of things are focused to that main entrance. This here is the rendering view coming in right as you turn off of Stanton into the parking lot and look directly at the end of the one wing. So there's some enhancements with some lounge space here. There'll be some gardens, which is tough to see in the rendering, and signage and stuff as you pull in and turn right back to that main entrance that I referenced in the previous slide. And landscaping is a huge outdoor activity, and landscaping is a huge component of this community. These are giving you a flavor of what those spaces will look like in the end, and really the rendered site plan does not do justice to the variety and amount of plantings and spaces that will be here. That will be developed as this plan moves forward in great detail with our landscape architect partners. But essentially, you're looking at multiple pockets of space for residents to use. There's upper spaces, which will feature sitting areas, paths, landscaping, even activities, shuffleboard, etc. Interior courtyards, memory care courtyards, which are designated to the memory care unit and the needs that those residents will have as far as getting outside, safe spaces, spaces that allow for movement and activity, and of course visiting by families. So just an idea of the richness of each one of those spaces. And they'll really exist throughout this site. And then interior, we're talking about a lot of different spaces for residents to congregate, to socialize, to enjoy their years, and it's dining will be a big part of this, a great dining set of spaces, a casual, some more formal, different offerings, lots of lounge space, game space, club rooms, theater rooms, and then, therapy space, fitness space, and then, all those other things, beauty salons, etc. So this is a flavor, again, of what those spaces will be within this building. And then the other part of this site, as we know, is the climate-controlled self-storage building. So that building, as I stated, is set towards 202, north side of the site, but there's a real goal here to have this, from an architectural, from an aesthetic standpoint, fit in with what we're proposing on the assisted living building. So this is the rendering of it right here. It's 4 stories. You're looking at this as you come through past the assisted living building on the 202 side into the parking area and drop-off area. So you see that 4 stories there. Those windows will be decorative by nature because you don't typically have windows, but we're committed to having that so that when the residents and the feel of the site as a whole is maintained with that building. And then there's a little covered drop-off area that's shown in the site plan, which will be where the people using the storage are coming undercover to load and unload. I think that's the.
When we were before the Planning Commission, the issue came up, and it was more of just a general comment. When somebody first looks at this conditional use application, they think that there's 2 disparate uses on the property, self-storage and an assisted living facility. But you, in your experience, explained that these combination of uses are becoming more and more prevalent throughout the region. Did I accurately paraphrase your testimony?
Yeah, they're actually surprisingly a real. We have found, and we certainly have clients who are telling us that this is a great mix. There's within the senior living regulations, there's a regulation for storage. It's one of the issues. If I've dealt with this personally, and probably many of us has when mom or dad is moving into this. There's a lot of stuff to store. There's a lot of stuff to deal with. There's never enough of a place to put it. So the answer a lot of times is self-storage, and this happens to be a site that has one there. So in that way, in that very straightforward way, it's a really nice mix. It's also a nice mix for all the other reasons that were discussed as they relate to traffic. We're not talking about high traffic use, and I'm not an expert in that, but you start to see those things. So when we're talking about having a quiet, safe, residential feel, which is so important to this building, that's a nice use to pair with it for all those reasons.
I don't have any further questions for this witness. So that concludes my presentation of witnesses for tonight, and I would like to move my exhibits. We can make our witnesses now available to the board's leisure for questions. We also have an individual on our team who I not call for direct testimony, but if there are more operational questions about the senior assisted living facility generally, I can have them sworn and be prepared to answer questions in that regard.
Yeah, well, thank you very much to all the presenters for your testimony here. So just like for the board, in terms of a process, what I'd like to try to do is, since the witnesses have all presented, we have an order to them. So if we maybe could think of questions for each of the witnesses in turn versus a kind of scattershot approach, where it would be all over the place, maybe that would be a good way to try to manage it. So we can give it a go. So I'll kick it off, if you like, with a couple of questions for Mr. Tarantini. So I was not completely clear on the ultimate ownership of this property down the road. Is Branchport Capital still involved when the operator is in place for the assisted living and the self-storage unit, or is it now a condo association with those two entities as the owners of the property? How does this work?
Our expectation is that each use will have its own entity, and it'll be a partnership with an operator of each. So Branchport will remain, or our ownership will have some involvement in those LLCs. But yeah, if I'm answering your question correctly, there is a condo. It's not going to be subdivided, so it's going to remain under the same ownership of condo ownership.
Okay.
Can I ask, because that's not clear to me, so Branchport will continue to have some affiliation with the individual condo unit owners?
That's our expectation today.
Okay, so, but there's no commitment 100%. There could be an opportunity where Branchport would say, I don't want to be in this business, I'm going to sell condo unit 1, which is the self-storage, to some completely unrelated entity, and I'm going to sell unit 2, which is the assisted living, again, to some completely unrelated entity.
That's not our expectation.
That's not my question.
Yes.
Question
Yeah.
was asked.
Okay.
That's it could be sold like a property.
So where does 8 Stone come in this?
So A Stone is
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
I asked where does 8 Stone come into play of the ownership or?
A Stones is the current owner of the hotel. So they, once the approvals are in place, there'll be a closing. There'll be no longer ownership of the property. Correct.
And just to make it clear, so when you subject the property, whatever entity Mr. Tarantino acquires the land, and say it's Sam LLC, for example, Sam LLC would have to record a declaration of condominium that would subject the entire property to condominium. And in that declaration, he would identify 2 condominium units. One would be probably the building, the self-storage, and the other would be the building with the assisted living. The common elements would be the driveways and the parking areas and things like that. And they would all be subject then to whatever regulations are within that declaration of condominium. And I think one of the conditions should be that the board should be able to review that, make sure the declaration of condominium is consistent with how they're being presenting this to you and any other conditions that might come about during land development.
Sam, have you, I know you've been in the process of interviewing several operators for the assisted living. Have you settled an operator for the assisted living facility?
We're very close. I know that was a big question from everyone as we met in the past. We've done a pretty extensive search. We've interviewed numerous operators, narrowed down to 3, and we've been having much more detailed conversations, and we're very close to making a decision on the operator. But all 3, and we can have Denny describe a little bit more. All 3 are very experienced operators, ranging from running currently 5 or up to 20 some facilities in the state of Pennsylvania and Maryland. I think there's a combination of states where they operate. So it's been an important decision to the care and the long-term operation of the facility, and we're very close to getting the contractual details to have the operator on board.
Just to follow up with that question, how much will the operator, once you make that selection, have a say in the actual design of the facility, especially the internal part of the facility?
A great deal. They work very closely, and Jeremy can discuss in more detail how closely the architectural team works with the operations team. Care and the spaces that are required for different layers of care are important to each operator. And that's also been a lengthy discussion with them as well.
Sam, just so I'm clear, the existing 3 parcels are all owned by 8 Stones Westchester LLC. There's 3
Correct.
parcels involved, right? And
Yes, they're all.
you are going to merge those into a single parcel.
That is correct.
There appears to be some kind of business relationship now between the Quality Inn owner and the car service garage next to it, the storage of U-Haul trailers, trucks and vehicles in that existing parking lot. Will that relationship end and not be part of the future for this site?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will not be having any rental of space or vehicles on site.
Okay. You talked about conversations with Good Fellowship Ambulance on a subscription basis for the units.
Yes.
Is the subscription based on the 175 units or the number of beds? Because some of these units have 2 beds in them, correct?
Yeah, there's 2-bedroom units. So the 2-bedroom units are contemplated to be a separate fee than for the 1-bedroom units, or the studios and 1-bedroom units are the same. But yeah, we contemplated that in the membership fees.
Okay,
If
so
I
you,
could just have one prediction.
so just want to be clear, so that you're okay with the conditional use being that there will be an obligation for the operator to continue with the subscriptions to this ambulance company going forward?
Sure.
Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. One of my questions relative off of Sean's was, on Exhibit 7, it indicates the 1-bedroom shall be equivalent to a single senior citizen, and the 2-bedroom will be equivalent to a senior couple. What is the price of that? And that's on an annual basis, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I think that's a definition for, that's right off the,
A7?
yeah.
Yeah, it's in there, but there's no prices in there. It just indicates, and it doesn't say whether it's annual or not.
Yeah, I think maybe Luke can.
It says prior to the applicant will make a donation of $13,500, but there's no indication in that's in number 2 and number 1 relative to the actual cost associated with a senior couple and a single senior citizen.
Yeah, the reason it's stated that way is because we originally had plugged in today's numbers as to what that membership would be in 2023.
Okay.
And at the request of the ambulance club, they requested that we modify that we would pay whatever the rate is
At that time.
at the time.
Okay.
So that's why we don't know what the rate is going to be
Okay.
at the time.
I'm just curious, what is it right now, Tom?
It's currently 50 for single and 75 for double.
He's going to have to identify himself.
I'm
You're
sorry.
going to have to identify yourself. Come on.
I'm sorry. My name is Tom Wilcox. I'm the Executive Director of Good Fellowship Ambulance and EMS Training Institute. The name is WILCOX.
Ask a question because it relates to A7. It just went out of my head. Oh, the letter indicates that Branchport Capital or its successors agrees to pay that. But what if Good Fellowship ceases to exist or has a successor entity that provides the EMS service to this place? Will you agree to modify Exhibit A7 to also require those subscriptions to the extent that the successor EMS entity has such a program?
Well, I think to answer your question, the condition does provide at the end that if circumstances change, that we can petition this board to modify the condition, that the applicant can petition if Good Fellowship is out of business, if there's some change in the law where I don't foresee it, and I don't think Good Fellowship foresees it, where somebody else will pay all of the ambulance costs for the site, we have the ability to come back and ask this board to modify the condition.
I just worry that if Good Fellowship were to merge with some other entity, or if Good Fellowship, for whatever reason, another entity within West Goshen becomes the EMS provider, the way you divvy up your boundary lines.
Yeah.
I don't want this to only go specifically to Good Fellowship. I think it should relate to whoever it is, the EMS provider, provided that EMS provider has a similar subscription program.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, if you want to play with that,
Okay.
if you play with that condition of approval, that's fine. I mean, I think probably standing here, we would want to make sure that it's a not-for-profit,
Right.
similar not-for-profit.
Understood.
Well, wouldn't that
service.
ultimately be up to whatever company it would merge with? And wouldn't those negotiations have to be done with that company, or would we actually include that?
No, you have to, because your condition, the way I would draft it is make them comply with A7, but I want A7 to be able to not just go to Good Fellowship in the event Good Fellowship isn't the one providing the services. But I think we can work through that language.
So I have another question related to, and this is really, I'm sure there's requirements and obligations on this, but the actual interior facility design for assisted living, I presume there are minimum requirements for corridor sizes, for the size of the elevators to get stretchers, gurneys in, to access rooms, etc. And things change, equipment size change. I'm looking at Mr. Wilcox here. I mean, who sets the specifications for the interior design to make sure that they're future-proof with regard to easy access for the emergency service to the units?
You're asking Tom?
I'm asking you both kind of like, who makes sure it's fit for the size of the equipment that our ambulance company uses to provide that service?
Why?
He knows the state, right?
Well, I can speak to what the.
Just speaking to the codes that govern the interior design of the building, which these standards generally take into account the needs, of the population and the needs to get stretchers and those kinds of things into it. But we have the International Code Council, which is the recognized state of Pennsylvania international codes, which have a distinct requirement for this type of use. We will comply with all of those. The state of Pennsylvania also has its own guidelines as it relates to this type of building. We will comply or exceed with all those standards. Those are the two big ones. We also work off, and I'm going to forget the standards, but we have a national standard that our office uses, which is a recognized healthcare guideline as it relates to assisted living that we will also use to govern how we lay out and design these interior spaces. So when I say we will meet and or exceed all those requirements.
Okay. One last question related to this general topic. So I believe Pennsylvania does not require this by state law, but many states do, and that is to have a registered LPN or RN 24/7 at these kind of facilities, particularly if there's a memory care unit. Are you looking to have an operating company provide that level of service?
Yeah, we are. Yes, we are.
Would it be okay if we stipulated that in the conditional use? Because it does have a direct impact on the amount of emergency calls that are put onto the Good Fellowship ambulance. In the absence of a 24/7 coverage of an RN or an LPN, the call volume does go up because people are not there able to make decisions as to whether it's really a true emergency or not.
Sure. The answer is I think so. If you allow me in the meantime to consult with our operator consultant, but I don't think it would be a problem.
And just to follow up on Sean's question relative to that, the estimate in, I guess, this packet here is about 150 EMS calls per year currently. So would that be with the LPN? Were those stats associated with an LPN being there? Or a nurse?
Is that something that was submitted by the emergency services?
No, that was
generate?
that was in one of these, I think it was 8. It was number 8. I think it was listed in, I'm sure it was 8. Yes, it was in the meeting minutes, page 2 of the Planning Commission. It's Exhibit 8 or number 8 on here.
Exhibit B8, boarding through data.
Yeah, it was the meeting minutes of June 13, 2023 from the Planning Commission on page 2, number 6. It indicates, number 6, it indicates the number of units, and then it says users could generate an additional 150 EMS.
Sorry, you're just going to need to speak up, please.
Okay, so it's actually page 2 of the meeting minutes of number 8 dated June 13, 2023. Number 6 of the meeting minutes, it indicates that usage could generate an additional 150 EMS calls per year. So my question is, was these numbers based off of having an LPN or an RN or some type of nurses there that would mitigate some of the call numbers potentially?
You talk loud because you don't take every word you're saying.
Did you hear me? Okay.
We did not speak to those numbers. I believe it was Charles who did.
Yeah, our averages show that per unit or per resident, you will have at least one per resident call a year, averaging 1 to 1.2. So with 175, you have full capacity, it's going to be 175 calls a year. If it's not full capacity, I think we came up with about 150 a year.
Correct.
Is it doable? Can you handle something like that? Additional?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Just update.
This is our assistant chief, by the way. These are
Just for further clarification here, when this A7 in the packet that you guys gave us, when the ambulance membership conditions, this verbiage, there's two parts here. One is for the subscription, the other one is for the one-time donation. Has this been developed in consultation with Good Fellowship?
Yes.
So this is both, Tom, you are also aware of this? This is what you have in your hand as well?
Yes.
So this is acceptable to Good Fellowship?
This is acceptable because we believe that the donation is going to go to necessary equipment that will be used, that will benefit the residents and the township in our service.
Okay. So if we made this verbiage here a conditional use, this would be acceptable to both Good Fellowship as well as to...
It is for Good Fellowship.
Okay.
And it is for Bridgeport.
And just so I'm clear, I did hear you say that you would be willing to consider having a requirement that there's an LPN or RN 24/7 by the operator. You would consider that?
You didn't answer that yet.
What I asked, Chairman, if I could just answer that question a little bit later in the testimony, and just consult with our operations consultant.
All right. Is there any other questions for Mr. Tarantini at this point? I'm sure we'll get things out of order.
Sure.
We're going to move on now, focus on.
Actually, I had two. I think it's for him, I'm not sure. Do you know if there's going to be required any sewer modifications necessary as a result of any of the construction or building?
You know, I'm going to let Steve answer that when he comes up with his testimony, if you don't mind. I don't think like I said, the capacity is there, and it's currently under the hotel. The infrastructure is under the hotel. It's being serviced. We expect that the assisted living facility is almost replacing the hotel building, so it'll be in close proximity. But he can give you more detail.
Okay. Then the last one I had was, is there any solar considerations being taken in consideration, like buildings, the roofs, or anything like that, or anything green relative to that?
We have not looked at that at this stage of the conditional use, and what we've done is conceptual. So the answer is we haven't.
Is a self-storage conceptual a flat roof?
We have it's partial, and I'll let Jeremy answer to that. But I think it is a partial flat roof.
I mean, one thing we can ask for here is, even if it's not from day one, as you go into more detailed design, at least design structurally for all the roofs to be capable of handling a solar panel array.
Yes.
Yeah. We're very green here. We'd like to push that. That's why I asked if there's any consideration.
We would certainly take it into the design as we develop things forward further.
And if you don't design from the start, it's very hard to change later on, but it's quite simple design.
Understood. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we could talk with the engineer now.
Sure. I'm sorry. Actually, no, you answered the other ones, Sam. Thanks.
I had one more that I think might be relative to you. The emergency entrance and exit gate that the ambulance or EMS would have to come through. How does that work? There's probably a lock on it, and then everybody would have a lock? I mean, somehow a key to open that lock? How does that work? How would that work? The emergency fence entrance.
Maybe Mr. Source Line could come up now, because I got questions about this at the entrance and everything, so I think we're ready to transition.
Thank you. I guess I should start with sewer.
Okay.
To answer your question. We don't plan any modification to the existing sewer system that exists today. It flows essentially through our site and then off to 202. What we do plan is there's going to be a lateral extension from the assisted living facility to that existing manhole. And then given the elevation change, there's going to be a small low pressure system to service the self-storage facility, which will have a minimal amount of sewer service requirement in relationship to the assisted living.
Just following up on this sewer line, do you know what the existing material construction is for this sewer line? I mean, it's going to be 50 years old at this point, presumably. Is it asbestos cement?
I can't say with certainty. I do have utility plans from 1969 and 86, so I can confirm that later.
So while we're going to inspect the condition of the sewer lines on the property and see if they need repair or replacement?
There's no indication that they do need repair or replacement. If they need to be televised, we could potentially make that a condition.
Okay. So going back to the emergency access, could we call it the diagram up and zoom in on that area? Because I'm not fully understanding what's proposed now. I know you said it's going to be more fully developed during land development, which makes sense. But for the purposes of understanding the fact that there's two places where we can enter emergency vehicles onto the site, one off Stanton Avenue and one off Walnut Street. You're saying that a fire truck and an ambulance will be able to access and turn in off Walnut Street through this emergency access gate, and where on this rendering is shown a walkway, in actual fact will be a firm-based grassed area that will allow a vehicle to turn in, come over towards the self-storage, turn left and alongside it to be able to provide emergency services in terms of fire support, or in the event that the ambulance cannot get in off Stanton Avenue, then drive around and get to the front of the building. Is that correct?
It's essentially correct. We had always contemplated as the sidewalk, again, this area here, you can see the pullout. That is where the existing access exists in terms of grade. It's broken macadam as it meets the cartway of Walnut. But we had always anticipated, because the development of this exterior area is going to be a courtyard area, that the walkway would coincide with an improved subgrade, whether that be a grass paver or some geosynthetic enforced area, to then come along in between the buildings and interconnect with the terminus of the drive aisle. It should be pointed out, and this was discussed in my meeting with Ms. Testa, your fire marshal, that that's an emergency situation. That's a worst case scenario, full engagement. For the most part, our internal circulation and access off of Stanton facilitates general emergency access.
Yeah. I mean, we would fully expect that to always be the case, other than the event that that entrance was blocked by some accident that coincided with the need to get an ambulance, for example, into the facility.
Correct. And in terms of the gate, right now it's bollards and a chain. That would be improved to the standards acceptable to the fire marshal.
Okay.
So how would that gate work? Everybody would have a key to that gate? Or?
Generally speaking, that is the way it works. I can't speak exactly how it works today, but in most municipalities, it's a common key that's used, and even the materials themselves can be a breakaway material. You know, if we don't have the key, that it has the ability to enter in, and that's at the repair of the facility.
Can I jump onto that? So obviously there's a buffer, the supplementing the buffer with landscaping. Is it that there'll be a break in the buffer where that gate is?
There will be along the pathway, and we look at essentially a 12-foot wide swath, and that's increased giving the turning movement. But because of the staggered nature, the screening component is a double row evergreen, 8 foot on center. So if you can envision, look, the walkway, as it comes through there, the front side would have a single row of evergreens, and on the back side, it would be the second row of evergreens, simply separated by the width of the improved subgrade. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I was going to ask about this double row of evergreens, though. I mean, one thing that is ubiquitous now is this is the way that a new development is blocked from existing view. I mean, I personally am more in the mind of continuing the kind of existing vegetation that is there, which is the deciduous trees with shrubs, etc. I don't know what the residents will think. Maybe they'll prefer the double row of arborvitae. Again, it's a question to me that we can flesh out during the land development process. But
It's a good point, but maybe my testimony wasn't correct. We intend to maintain the existing vegetation. And given the fact that it's a 25-foot wide dimensional requirement, but the double row of evergreens essentially takes up a 16-foot width. So I would anticipate there'll be some removal of that vegetation, remove the scrubs, the invasives, so that it's primarily deciduous. I think there's some evergreens up on the southern area, but between the proposed buffer and the existing, it'd be a combination of deciduous and evergreens, and certainly that can be vetted out further during land development.
There's a bit of an inconsistency in your environmental impact statement on page, environmental impact assessment, on page, well, actually it's not the page number, it's section 2E. It states what you've just said, that the boundary vegetation shall be maintained with post-developed emissions as much as possible, etc. But then in section 3D, it says existing vegetation cover is minimal will be removed. So I just want to get clarity that you're not proposing to remove this boundary vegetation that you described in section.
No,
2E.
maybe that needs clarification in the environmental impact statement. Again, any removal would be invasives, dead material. Our intent is to maintain the character of that existing vegetation overall.
While we're on this, you finish?
One more on this buffer. So if you could scroll down the diagram, and it's in one of the plan drawings too. It shows this vegetative buffer as required by the ordinance. It's all on West Goshen properties. Keep going, Brian. There's this western edge of this property here, the property owner in West Town, between the parking lot and the park property now. I don't believe there's much vegetation there. Is the intention to put a vegetative buffer along that side of the property as well, or not?
It's currently not. You know, we strove to provide the buffer in accordance with West Township
West
ordinance.
Goshen's ordinance.
West Goshen's ordinance.
Yeah.
And that's limited, you know, it ends here.
Right.
This being, generally speaking, the common line between West Town and West Goshen, but we don't anticipate or propose at this time any additional landscaping within West Township.
Well, West Township made themselves a party to this. I don't know if that particular property owner is here tonight, but if they were to say they would like that, would you consider it?
Provided it's not land development or disturbance, planting of trees is always a great idea.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah. Could you bring that further up?
Back to the top.
Yeah, up to the top, yeah. Now, on your proposal here, this is the walking trail, I believe, it says, is that correct?
Correct.
That would go along the perimeter of the assisted living facility. On the exhibit, Board Exhibit B8, the West Goshen Township Planning Commission meeting, they made a recommendation to accept the conditional use application. First consideration would be subscription to EMS services, which we've already discussed. The second consideration they had was for consideration for pedestrian safety, especially along this area here. Would you accept that as a conditional use for this application?
Anything associated with pedestrian safety, we would accept. I think what they were talking, if you could try and scroll up a bit, my recollection was the focus in between the parking area and the lower loading area of the storage facility, and the potential for, in any parking area, a parked vehicle to stray potentially beyond its limits. So I spoke at the Planning Commission. There's not only a grade differential there, but there's going to be fencing, and we would include some other barrier, namely bollards, something aesthetically appropriate to to negate that, yeah.
Right, so this is something we can make a conditional use that you're making a consideration for, but we'll vet it out during the settlement process.
That would be acceptable.
Okay.
Relative to what John just asked, I have a question tapping on to that. On the pedestrian safety concern of the Planning Commission, which was June 13th, 2023, they had a concern and they had testimony tonight indicating that it was adequate to what you were proposing to the Planning Commission. But then on Exhibit A12, it says on page 2, under bicycle and pedestrian facilities, it said, based on field observations, there are no pedestrian or bicycle-specific accommodations within the vicinity of the existing proposed site. So that
Are you referring to the environmental impact statement?
it's actually Exhibit 12, which is
That's traffic report?
analysis, yeah. So it's a little bit unclear to me as to whether the concerns of the Planning Commission have been adhered to relative to the statement here.
Let Alice answer.
Can I,
She's questioning the statement he made.
So that was in our traffic. We were referring to pedestrian bicycle facilities within the public right of way, not interior to the site. We were talking about the street number 202 Stanton. That comment is limited to the public roadways. And it does not reference any internal pedestrian safety. It's purely road out in the public right of way.
Okay, because that was confusing because I didn't see him just an external there.
Just to build this pedestrian safety thing, and again, this is land development, I know, but just to point it out, I personally do not like the way that the sidewalk from the handicap parking comes right up to the turn circle in front of the main entrance. You know, if there's someone frail or elderly falls or stumbles on that sidewalk right at that entrance, they would fall in the path of the vehicle. I would like to see a 4-foot buffer between the sidewalk coming up to the main entrance and the main circle there, just to give a little bit of protection against someone falling at that point.
I understand those concerns. It's, you know, we're dealing with Americans with disability regulations. It's a nice transition to have that. I wouldn't disagree, and we could get that during land development.
Okay.
We have the area.
Turning to stormwater, you know, you have a substantial improvement proposed in terms of these underground subsurface facilities, 5 of them in total. Do we know that the infiltration capability of this site is able to handle all that?
That testing's ongoing. When we did our analysis, we assumed a conservative rate, and we will adjust those, the system itself to account for the actual field testing.
Okay. One other aspect around sustainability that we are trying to work on as a board and staff in West Goshen is to look at improving our, when we see redevelopment, to try to have electric vehicle charging stations as part of the redevelopment. It's a lot easier to put them in during this stage and come back and obviously retrofit something. I would personally propose something in the order of 6 dual charging stations for employees and visitors to the facility. Again, it's about making this future-proof against what we see as probably a likely change in the way that people own vehicles in the future. So would that be something that you would consider as part of a requirement?
I would have to defer to Sam on that.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yes, you are. What are you thinking about?
We will do the 2 charging stations. That was
the dual.
Well, it was 6 fuel charging stations, so it's 12 spots
I'm
in
sorry,
total.
the dual,
Yeah.
the 6 units, the dual charging
And
stations.
again, I'm not saying you have to put the actual charges in from day one, but if you've run the conduit and you've designed the power panel accordingly, it's all designed and ready to go, and as the demand increases with employees or visitors, you can add the actual charging stations.
Right.
It's just designing it in from the start is so much
It's a great idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you have other questions, while I keep looking at all my list here.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm trying to still wrap my head around the egress and access to the site here, for both assisted living and as well as for the self-storage. When you're, let's see, Exhibit A8, the conditional use plan there, sheet 1 of 7. Well, let's go all the way down to sheet 7-7, where you have an illustrated turning movement plan.
Mhm.
I know you talked about it. It shows going in, but I still can't quite envision how you're going to get out. You're going to have to, so you can drive in straight, you're going to have to back out of this facility in order to get a tractor trailer out or a fire truck? I mean, what's the game plan here?
That is correct. There are K-turn. It's dependent upon the area, and I'll hopefully walk through the areas. In terms of access off of Stanton, as part of our testimony, we talked about potential improvement of the radii, namely for the eastern existing driveway to facilitate that turn. So fundamentally, all truck traffic would enter through the eastern driveway. Passenger vehicles and emergency vehicles could enter either of the two. So the illustrative plan shows a pull-in. Let's focus on the upper area. And if you could increase that just a bit, Brian, thank you. It does show the dead-end movement of, let's talk about a fire truck. And what needs to be shown and what's evaluated as part of this analysis is the ability for that vehicle to back out of that site. So there's not an internal circulation around the building on the paved surface. It's true for the lower entrance to come in and back out in this area. This is the loading area of the assisted living facility. The turning movement would come in, load, back out, dead end in, back out. Same can be said for the storage facility. The storage facility, though, also has on what would be the southern side of the building a pull-in movement and a back out through the drive aisle and exit. And the largest vehicle would be the truck, and that's what we will show in the design. But I can state that as part of this analysis, we pulled those vehicles in and backed them out. Again, remember an emergency situation, then Walnut comes into play.
So there is no way to turn around. You got to drive in the street, you got to back out.
For a truck, for an ambulance, for a passenger vehicle, we have the turnaround area here. We have the parking area, back out, come in, as well as the loading.
So, I'm sorry, for a fire truck, where would that fall into it? The fire truck can't turn around in that little, or can it?
No, a fire truck would not utilize the turnaround area and beneath the port co-share.
It would have to back out.
Correct.
So I guess my question is there some sort of fire code or standard that this meets, that this is allowed?
There is. There is a fire code, and that would be, as part of the land development, fully vetted by the fire marshal to assure that the design is consistent.
Other questions for the engineer?
I have questions. You had talked about, I don't know if it's you or Sam that said, would there be an opportunity to reduce the number of parking spaces? Because you're meeting the code requirement, but what would be the consideration, or what would prompt you to reduce the number of parking spaces?
To reduce overall impervious surfaces, there's really no need for this particular use of assisted living to be overparked. Given the nature, and possibly Jeremy can speak in greater detail, but although it's assisted, very few individuals, residents of that facility, are utilizing vehicles. So spaces could be removed within Westtown Township. They could be reduced in West Goshen Township.
But would that be after you've identified the operator, and the operator has given you like real data based on the number of spaces that they see they need for that many beds?
Correct.
Okay, that's
correct.
Right.
But again, the conditional use plan, the key that I want to state is the requirement. We meet the requirement, sure. And that minimum number will always exist on the site.
So I have a question too, and I guess my second part to that question is there a chance then that the number of parking spots would increase?
I can safely say no, it won't increase.
Okay.
I have one more question. You talked about a reduction in impervious cover and your opinion that the stormwater will be an improved situation post-development. Are you aware of any issues today with stormwater management runoff onto adjoining properties?
I am not. Let me restate that. I did hear recently there are certain areas, the Walnut Street area runoff. There's no stormwater controls along Walnut Street. It runs down. There's a landscaping business along our northern property line. We are significantly reducing the runoff down through there, whereas we're capturing much of the site that was, I'm going to call it bypass flow from the Quality Inn, and there's a subsurface system, what would be the northeast corner of the site. In terms of our discharge point to the roadside swale along here, that again, that takes the lion's share of the property itself, and significantly reduces it, maintains that discharge point into that roadside swale to release it. And there's a larger expansive drainage area that extends into Westtown Township that's received by a series of stormwater collection points along both in our site and along Route 202. We're not changing any of those, but we're collecting a good portion of this area here and diverting it through that internal system that's discharged to the roadside swale.
Okay. And then I have another, I don't know who's going to answer this, but in terms of the types of trucks, do you anticipate for either use having tractor trailers frequently coming to the property?
I can speak in generality. It's very small. Very small. I think it was 5%.
Actually, 1 to 3% for the self-storage.
1 to 3% for the self-storage.
Okay.
I have some traffic questions for Mr.
Sean, do you want to just ask if the court reporter is okay?
Need a break here.
Need a break?
5 minutes?
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just speak up, you know.
Yeah. They don't like to do that, but you can see the agony in their.
We'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
It's not hard. It's short.
Yeah. Just need to stretch.
It's the hardest job. Candy downstairs.
No, I appreciate it. No, I'm good. I just need to stretch my arms out.
Exactly. That's what I thought.
AI, so many
Nah, see, the thing is, even with that, it doesn't, people are talking over each other, people have bunch of different things that go into it. Even tonight, I mean, just answers, you know, cutting off, can't hear something, not going to tell you to stop. I mean, yeah, it might be effectively take over every.
Not a board position. They can have it, quite frankly, but I'm just saying, you know,
It
somebody
could
still
be
has
the
to.
merits. Yeah, but if you think about it, it could. I said the same thing. One of the judges asked that. I said, well, I can write I didn't know what the law is. You know, it's you know, who knows what the law that goes.
I'm just saying this, you guys been doing this for how many, forever?
Yeah, the thing is, right, and it's all the same thing. I mean, I will like
I said last time, and he said,
but
they actually make a transcript from
no, they had to send it out for somebody else. And even when they still have the cases, they still have a so it's you know, they've been saying that we're going to go away.
There's no doubt.
Yeah, right, exactly.
At some point, who knows?
Yeah. As long as you retire by then,
yeah, as long as I'm retired by then, I don't care what they do.
All right, I heard it. Good.
Yeah.
If not, I don't think it's
Yeah, no, that's fine.
You're the sound board. No matter if you're going to be all the way down there.
yeah, and I had a cousin in trouble today. Not part of the, that's just, you guys don't give me regulars anymore. Well, at least not. They do all the morning stuff. Yeah. Swear the testimony you're about to provide be true, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to reconvene here. So I think we have some questions next for the traffic engineer, Mr. Meitzler.
Yes.
Hi, right. I'll kick it off. There was, in your report, it mentions the fact that there's potentially a PennDOT future project to provide additional two-lane flow on this bypass to get onto the 202. How will that affect the design as it's proposed today?
To be quite candid, we provided the information we have on that project right now. I honestly do not know how far PennDOT has vetted that out or how far those construction impacts might extend back. Certainly, any improvement to that ramp that would help facilitate the flow of northbound traffic to 202, gets rid of that backup that we see all the time, is an improvement.
So you think it would be an improvement? Because to me, it sounds like the speed's just going to increase. People are not going to have to worry about merging, and the potential for an accident trying to get out of Stanton Avenue with that higher speed flow is raised in my thought process. Would you not agree?
It could be, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman. I have not seen PennDOT's proposed design. I don't know that they've developed it beyond we would like to improve the throughput and capacity on that ramp. How far back that may extend down 202, I honestly don't know. I really don't know. I would imagine that they would try and stay within their right-of-way. Current designs for most projects, you always want to maintain a full-width shoulder. Again, I cannot speak for District 6, nor do I have any exact details on that.
Sean, can I ask a follow-up for that?
Sure.
In your experience, if PennDOT was going to design that, would they look at the impact upon Stanton and vehicles exiting
Absolutely.
that? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to.
Other questions from the board on traffic-related issues?
Yeah, I have one. I have one related to crash data investigation, which is Exhibit A12. On there, it talks about the crashes that if there's 5 or more above within a year period, and that's considered something they need to look at. And so I guess my question is relative to the highest crash that was there in that area was in 2016 where there was 5 crashes, which is almost above where something needs to be done. And then you go down all the way to 2021 where there's only 1 crash. So is this data accurate based on the volume? Because obviously the volume at that location from 2016 to 21 was way down.
These are the reported crashes that we received from the PennDOT database for this intersection and this location.
Yeah, I understand that, but the volume of traffic coming in and out of that facility has diminished greatly from 2016 to what it is today even. So you don't have the volume going in and out like you had back in 2016 when it was a banquet hall and it was a restaurant and it was a bar and you had the hotels that were almost full capacity.
I would counter that the type of user, the use change, you will no longer have that in and out. You will have a regular, consistent user base utilizing the facility rather than people who are unfamiliar, people staying for the night, people coming to a banquet facility, coming to a bar. You're going to have regular employees and residents using using that, and we are anticipating an overall decrease in peak hour traffic to and from the site, and also your driver population utilizing the driveway will be completely different.
I think you're just commenting that, but all he's doing is telling you the number of crashes that were reported. So that what the uses were is irrelevant. It's just a data number on how many crashes were reported through those years. You're making a commentary that likely the crashes decreased because the scope of the use of the property changed.
Yeah, so
that's all she's saying.
Yeah.
But I'm making a comparison to future uses.
Right. Okay.
Done?
Yeah.
Question. On Exhibit B10, Chester County Planning Commission review letter dated June 16, 2023, page 4, item number 9, and I'll read it. The Township's emergency service providers should be requested to review the plan to ensure that they can safely navigate the proposed development when completed and access the facilities to address on-site emergencies, and then so forth. Would you accept this as a conditional use that the providers would sign off on the final plan as far as egress and access to the site, especially considering the nature of the facility we're considering here?
I'm not going to speak for the engineer, but I would assume that it's part of the fire marshal's review that not only does he looking at the internal circulation of the site, but they're also looking at how they get in and out of the site as well.
That they would sign off?
From the, I would assume that they would.
Okay.
Just exploring this potential for parking space reduction. Is it possible that a better solution to the entrance on Stanton Avenue, exit on Stanton Avenue, is to get away from the dual thing now, remove a number of the parking spaces, and have a much clearer, wider entrance and exit for traffic? I just don't see how we're going to enforce a truck only pulls in at this, or is it the eastern entrance? It just sounds like a nice idea, but in practice doesn't really work. And maybe the solution would be to have a single entrance there. And I know this is land development work in West Town, which we're trying to avoid, but the better solution for flow in and out of the property in Stanton Avenue might be a single entrance, wider entrance, less parking in that space, and do some redesign. design of that area. What do you think?
Okay, I'll let Sam answer.
I think there are several constraints on developing the site and the parking requirements. And, you know, like Lou said earlier, we can work with the radius and limit the truck entrance, but I think that the parking that is there and how it's laid out is critical for the development of the project to stay the way it is.
Why do you say that, Sam?
I'm sorry?
Why is that the case, given that it's away from the entrances for the buildings? It seems to be there just to, it's more than we need, and it's there to, right now, because we don't want to disturb it, it seems to me.
You're exceeding your parking spaces by 66 already.
Right, and I think you wouldn't be able to remove all those parking spaces. I think you would remove just a reduced amount of those spaces, and we can't remove that many spaces there. We need.
Can we zoom in on that section, Brian? I mean, just to kind of be specific, to me it's like one entrance right in the middle between the two today. Get rid of all those parking spots in the middle. You can keep the perimeter ones on the east and west side and have a single road, wide road that comes in and then splits to either go over towards self-storage or come up to the main entrance. Why is that not a better design?
You know, Steve, you worked on the plan if you want to help me.
Sure. The bottom line on required versus proposed as shown on the plan. There's 69 total spaces in the Westtown Township lot. I'll characterize the parking area as Westtown Township lot. So we're overparked by 36 spaces, 99, 88 required for the assisted living, 88 required for the assisted living, and 11 required for the storage facility. So in excess of 36. Any assessment of the overall project, we're meeting the ordinance requirement. There's always employee parking that's required. I would like to think that it's good part of the program ultimately that will be the assisted living is to have the I'm going to call it satellite or external Westtown parking to be fully designated for employee so that all residents can utilize the on-site parking. We have looked at these entrances. Also, as Westtown Township has been brought in to have us look at that, and with a minor modification, I shouldn't say minor, with a modification to the curb return, primarily on that eastern access drive, it will facilitate movement. There's currently, I believe there's a no truck sign to enter Stanton Avenue. We would have no truck traffic here, and as this use is designated, the residents, the individuals will come to realize that that is your main entrance into the site, with the lower entrance being for passenger vehicles and primarily exit. I'm sorry, not even exit. The eastern driveway will be predominantly truck traffic, with the lower area being passenger vehicles and emergency personnel as necessary. There is the ability to lose parking spaces, and we're developing that as the internal development of the building goes on.
So you're saying a truck is going to come in that second entrance, the one further north. The truck's going to come in, and they're going to deliver to the left down that road?
They can.
Or are they going to go up or both?
Either way. Well, predominantly the trucks, I'm going to say truck traffic, not emergency vehicle. They will make the left and facilitate move northbound. Emergency vehicles could make the right and enter in that manner.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the trucks. So if the trucks come in that entrance and they make a left, they're going to have to back all the way up, down that road.
If they make the left, they'll come in, move northbound, come in, they'll look for loading. They'll load in this area here. It has a wide berth. There's a loading area. identified, as well as access internal to the building, back, straight out, and exit.
Okay, so they'll be able to back out from the loading dock
Correct.
and exit through the same entrance?
Up through, correct.
Okay.
That, I'm going to call it the eastern plan north.
Excuse me, Steve, can I just ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any contemplation about just closing that access off completely and only leaving one? Has that been contemplated at all in the discussion with the project team?
No.
I mean, I remain unconvinced, if you don't mind me saying so, because I think, you know, the intention is trying to preserve this parking and meet the needs and, you know, make sure everything's done and not just to have to maybe work with West Town to do some of this work. That's my kind of gut feel about it. But I actually think, like we just described, you know, close that one entrance off, widen the top one, retain enough parking for employees, whatever else, and have a much clearer traffic flow in and out. It just seems like an alternative that would be worth exploring to me.
Can I just jump in and add a couple points from you know, we've also been involved in the planning and the overall layout of this site with Steve and the entire team. When we first started looking at this and laying out the locations for the assisted living and where the entrance for that is, and then how the storage and the loading work, we felt that the two entrances were a positive, not a negative. The trucks that we're talking about, so we're talking about the larger trucks. I think when we talk about, we're talking about the study of them with movement, but not the actual common amount of type of trucks that are on site. We're going to generally, these type of buildings are going to have smaller delivery type trucks. The same with the, if they're even considered trucks, vans, those types of vehicles are what you're going to primarily see. We love the fact that the lower entry piece on this is designated essentially to storage and delivery and maintenance and employees in that way. And the upper entrance is the familiar resident, visitor, you know, sons and daughters, that entrance, and takes you up to that private courtyard. So we actually love the hierarchy. We have since day one of those two entrances. Now, you know, so I think talking about like trucks, like no, that is the path if a large truck comes on site. I would say, and it's been, I think, proven out in the traffic, but just the knowing these communities really well, that is an extremely, extremely rare occurrence. So,
Question for staff. During the land development process, can we have our traffic engineer review that, the rationale that was given to us tonight around why this makes the most sense?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions from the board for, well, at this point, any of the presenters?
Did Sam answer the question about whether he would commit to an RN being on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Or LPN?
Or LPN?
Yeah, we can commit to an LPN being on site.
Okay.
I thought they were getting rid of the designation of LPN.
Why don't they all?
I'm pretty sure they do, because I know my aunt was and she had to become an
Okay,
RN.
so future proofing, if LPN designation is not available, then RN is acceptable?
We think so. I mean, yes.
Okay. Is there any other questions from the board or our solicitor or staff?
More. So the architecture looks lovely and it's compatible. Would you agree to a condition that requires the architecture for the two buildings to be compatible?
Yeah.
That was one of the comments from County Planning Commission, I think. All right, thank you.
Well, at this point, then, I guess we can look to folks who are attending tonight. If they have any questions that have not been answered through listening to this discussion.
And Sean, we should allow Mr. Altshaw as a party the first opportunity.
Yes, thank you. So, Mr. Altshaw, you're up.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the board. I'm heartened. I think that some of the questions that you asked about the access into the site through the West Town parking lot, in lack of a better name, I think we're kind of aligned, West Town and West Goshen are, specifically with respect to tractor trailers, and moreover specifically with respect to the impact of those tractor trailers turning right, going northbound on 202,
turning right and then immediate left into the parking lot. The impact of those turns on other northbound 202 traffic. What we've been sort of talking about are kind of the impact on Stanton Avenue. We haven't been talking about the impact in the 202 right-of-way. So I have a couple of questions from Mr. Meitzler that I'd like to bring up. A couple of things I'd like to highlight as well. There was some recent talk about a future PennDOT project of adding a lane for that exit ramp. And that is really precipitated by, when I started as West Town manager, it was one of my first meetings actually with PennDOT was about that, because there was a lot of, it's one of the most dangerous sections in West Town on our roadways, and then immediately turns into West Goshen. So I guess the first question I have for Mr. Meitzler is, correct me if I'm wrong, the crash data you had was only PennDOT crash data and didn't take into account West Town East Goshen police crash data or West Goshen police crash data. Is that correct?
Correct.
And could you clarify what the difference is between PennDOT crash data and a local police department crash data?
PennDOT, well, is the state police, and the West Goshen data is it can be a little more granular.
So for a simple example, a fender bender would not be a PennDOT
Would not be a
reported.
fender, no.
So there could be many more accidents than are reported in your report. Is that a fair statement?
It could be possible.
Thank you. The next question is,
I know I understood you evaluated site distances from the parking lot onto Stanton Avenue looking towards 202 and maybe even looking away from 202. But to clarify, did you examine or analyze site distances from the 202 Stanton Avenue intersection?
To date, we have not.
Certainly, I think that at a minimum that would be something that we'd like to see in a future traffic study.
Could you repeat what you're looking for there, John?
So the Mr. Meitzler's or traffic planning design, they didn't do an analysis of the site distance if you're at Stanton looking southbound at the northbound traffic on 202. You only did an analysis of the site distance from the parking lot looking out on Stanton Avenue. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. Another concern, I mean, and I was hard to hear that Mr. Tartini had a quick and handy estimate of how much tractor-trailer traffic is expected after construction is complete when the self-storage unit is in operation. I believe you said 1 to 3% of traffic is expected to be tractor-trailers. Is that correct?
That is what the operators are telling us.
I guess my immediate concern is, though, during the construction phase. Now, I imagine during the demolition of the existing facility, you'd be using dump trucks that aren't really as long as a tractor trailer to sort of remove all the old, stone and steel and all that. But when you're actually delivering new lumber, new steel, I can imagine a lot of, during that 3 or 4 or 6 month period, intensive delivery into the site. Would it be fair for me to assume that during that construction stage there would be a lot more than 3% of the traffic would be tractor trailers?
My response would be, if it approved, goes forward, begin the construction, the delivery and scheduling of materials be coordinated with the West Town Township and West Goshen in order to minimize impacts.
Sounds like a good position.
Yeah, and so I think you kind of understand where I'm going with this. I just really I think from West Town's perspective, and granted, I'm speaking as township manager, I still have to have this sort of position and my position sort of validated and authorized retroactively by my board. I guess the last sort of line of questioning I have is, as you testified, as all of you testified, the tractor trailers would go into the site on the eastbound entrance, and then they would back up, I guess, come back up this way on Stanton Avenue, and then move forward to approach to 202. Is that sort of crude?
No. Internal to the site would be in back.
I'm sorry.
In the court reporter has to hear you. It's been 2 hours and 10 minutes of him working on it.
Any backing movement would occur internal to the site. No backing movement would be proposed or required on the stand.
Okay, so when they're actually on public roads, Stanton Avenue, the tractor trailer would always be pointed forward, driving forward, correct?
Correct, free access.
And so, but they wouldn't be, the idea is they would not be allowed to turn left onto Stanton Avenue away from 202 because no trucks are allowed there. So all traffic would be required to turn back onto 202. And so I guess in general, I just want to clarify about turn radii. I think we've talked about this a little bit as far as the radius turning left onto Stanton Avenue from 202, but then the ability, the turn radius for a truck leaving the parking lot, making a right onto Stanton and then another right onto 202. Has that been examined?
We've examined the turning movements both along 202, heading northbound onto Stanton, as well as the exit movement from Stanton onto 202, and no revision to the radius would be required. However, as we discussed, using the easternmost driveway, the return, the lower return would be required to be widened. In a similar fashion, an exit vehicle utilizes a similar turning movement, so it would be designed for both an in and out, the redesign of that radius.
Okay, so that is contemplated. Okay. Well, I don't really have any further comments. I just, again, point you to the board exhibit. I believe it was 812, which was my letter dated to Mr. Bayshore, dated July 3rd, in which I sort of requested two sort of generalized conditions. First being, as part of land development, that there be some process for Westtown to be comfortable with the ability of tractor trailers to access the site, and finally that the applicant get any required, whether it's grading, signage, paving, building permit needed in Westtown as a condition of the conditional use decision. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, John. That's B9 was the letter from Westtown to the township. So,
thank you, John. Is there anyone else who would like to come and make a comment? This lady here.
Do you want me to come up?
Yes, please.
You need to state your name and address for the court reporter, please. Thank you.
My name's Mary Ty.
Wait till you get up there.
My name's Mary Ty. It's spelled T-Y-G-H, and I live at 939 South Walnut Street. My concern is with the entrance and the exit on Stanton Avenue, especially if you're coming on 202, off 202 in that lane. Right now you have traffic coming out of DML Automotive, and you have traffic coming out of the hotel. So all the data in the traffic report are based on one entrance and one exit. If you have two ways to come in and two ways to come out, I think it's going to be problematic because there's not a lot of room. I have had to I've been hanging on the side sometimes because someone didn't move and could get hit. So I think that it needs to be looked at, the parking lot and the entrance and the exit. So thank you.
Looked at in the sense of you believe of what a single wider entrance would be preferred?
Yes, a single entrance and a single exit. There are tractor trailers in there now.
Yeah.
And there are tractor trailers on Stanton Avenue and South Walnut Street, which aren't supposed to be there, but they are. So I just think it's a hard thing to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Pat McDonough, 7 Oakbourne Road in West Hampton, actually. I guess I have a couple questions for the experts here. They mentioned there was 150 EMS calls per year estimated for this facility. Do those vehicles come in with lights and sirens, or do they come without, based on the calls? What number of those 150 visits do they come with sirens?
It depends on the dispatch.
Okay, so assisted living facility, what's the percentage of an emergency which would require sirens and lights for assisted living with a memory care
I guess
facility?
it would all depend.
You say 50%? So we have 75 ambulance coming with sirens, lights coming in per year. Okay, that's good. The other question was, and I think the board here brought up, how do you propose to stop trucks from entering the southern or the one closest to 202? Is there going to be some sort of traffic control, or I just don't see how someone who's renting a unit in the facility with a U-Haul, how he's going to determine which entrance to enter and exit in that.
Predominantly through signage, and as the use becomes established, it's a known condition to utilize that easternmost driveway.
So someone who's newly renting a unit in the storage facility, he would have to utilize signs to know what entrance to enter and exit.
Correct.
And how are those signs going to be, since it's abutting a residential neighborhood, those signs will be small and not lighted?
There's standard dimensions to them. They will not be lit, freestanding, post-mount signs, no truck traffic.
And what percentage of a truck would abide by that?
I don't have that number.
Another big concern is light pollution. With a 24-hour storage facility on site, will that storage facility be lit 24 hours?
It'll comply with the township standards. Township standards require, I believe, dimming between 10 to 12. I'm speaking offhand here, but in accordance with township standards, and usually there's a requirement that there'll be no lighting through the midnight hour to dusk.
So no lights?
Security, low line security lighting falls out of that category.
And how about the parking facilities? Will they have lighting 24 hours?
Similar. No, they'll be controlled dimming, generally speaking, from 10 to midnight. No lighting from midnight to dusk with low-level security lighting maintained throughout the night.
Great. And then I guess the board mentioned putting provision in there for solar panels. It does appear that the storage facility has a perimeter, kind of a parapet roof on it, but predominantly it's a flat roof, which seems a perfect place for solar. However, the assisted living has gable end roofs, and those solar panels, we do provide solar panels. There'll be a large glare that will affect the neighbors if that sun hits the solar panels in a certain time of year. And solar panels have been proven to provide a large amount of glare to adjacent properties. So I would maybe put that on, maybe flat roofs could have the solar panels as opposed to slope roofs, given the proximity to the neighborhood. And then I guess you mentioned the PennDOT recordings of traffic. They're actually still out there. There's a painted bike that memorialized a death that occurred there probably about 5 years ago. So I think the PennDOT data doesn't truly reflect the number of accidents and deaths that have occurred at that intersection. And one concern that this resident just brought up is what happens is if a car comes off the 202 and is unfamiliar with this property, say a resident, someone from out of town is visiting a relative or someone's coming in a U-Haul and has to visually find out which entrance to go through using the signs, they tend to slow up on that turn and will block the next person who's coming off of 202 to make that turn. And therefore, and most of the accidents occur is when people are turning right onto Stanton and people are flying down 202 and basically rear end them because someone else in front of them is trying to either turn into the gas station or turn into the hotel. So I think we should really, really focus on local traffic accidents as opposed to PennDOT. I guess, let's see here. And then I guess, you said that there's 27 total U-Haul trucks that will probably come in here 10 day on AM, 17 PM. And most of those U-Haul trucks, people are unfamiliar with the location. If someone's trying to pull out of 202 with that U-Haul truck, how many cars will be beyond that where it will block that secondary entrance? My fear is you're going to have a greater amount of traffic. You have 175 residents, so there's going to be a fair amount of delivery trucks coming in to service this assisted living program. Plus, you count the 27 total U-Haul trucks coming in on a weekly basis. There's going to be a lot of traffic, truck traffic coming in and out of this facility. So I guess the question would be, how many vehicles would actually block those entrance and exits if there's a backup on 202?
Let me just clarify one thing. The storage facility is a climate control facility, and the operator, yes, the operator that we've talked to is 85% is residential traffic. So there'll be some folks that will use some U-Haul, but a lot of it is going to be personal vehicles that come in. So it can't be that the entire count of the traffic study will be U-Haul trucks. I just want to make that clear.
And then we talked about PennDOT possibly adding a second lane there. I know that further up 202, there's been several plans to close off Oakbourne Road, all these access roads onto 202 with this expansion of 202, particularly if they're going to add a secondary lane there. So a concern here that I think we should bring up is, I know there, and I have to look because I think I drive down Stanton all the time. I don't think I see a no trucks sign there, but I'll have to take a look tonight. But what we're going to have here is we're going to have, like the board mentioned, 2 lanes of traffic on 202 going 50, 60 miles an hour, and no one in the world is going to be able to make that right-hand turn. So people who are going to be familiar, who work there on a daily basis, who visit there on a daily basis, they're not even going to try to turn on 202. They're going to make a left out of that exit and enter through Stanton Avenue onto South Walnut, onto Oakland Road. So I guess my concern is with this increasing amount of traffic is you're going to get a lot of people who are familiar with the neighborhood who are going to basically use the neighborhood as a cut through to avoid that intersection on 202. Has a traffic study been looked at as what type of traffic would be affected further down Stanton and South Walnut? And I think I noticed in the architecture that did this meet the height restrictions of the ordinance in the township?
Yes.
And was there any thought of how to relate the architecture of the building to the regional architecture of West Town and West Goshen?
Yes.
In what fashion?
Well, we're still developing it, and we'll continue to, but the materials, the scaling as it relates to this building and to the surrounding area are all taken into account. Chester County stone, siding materials that you see similar, color palette that you see similar, porches, roof lines, etc.
And so the proximity to the neighborhood's been, maybe the size of the building is stepped down to accommodate the next, the proximity to a house right next to it, for instance.
It's important that we break the scale down as much as reasonable and possible, not just for something like that, but for the residents. It's important that the building not appear as some massive thing that they can't understand. It's really important that we catch the residential scale for them, but it will relate back to the neighborhood because of that as well. Yep.
And you mentioned about having false windows or decorative windows on the storage unit. Will those be backlit so at nighttime they're not just black, or how are they going to be real glass, or are they going to be fake glass? How are they going to be decorative windows?
To be determined. I don't think, and to some of the concerns that you said earlier, that you're going to want to backlight them necessarily because it's going to create light on the site that's not necessary. I mean, these buildings are pleasantly asleep at like 8 o'clock, which is great. They're quiet. There's no traffic. The lights are off. So I don't think we want the self-storage to impact that in any way. So yeah.
Great, awesome. And I guess my last thing was with the memory care facility, there's going to be, definitely people are going to be walking around. I see you have some walking paths, but those walking paths are going to be interrupted by the emergency access, which is concerning in my sense because you're going to have, memory care. You're typically walking your grandmother in a wheelchair, or they're walking, with a cane, and making the emergency access, which speaks to emergencies. People are going to be moving fast, trying to get in and out very quickly, and the walking paths, and there's not much walking paths for the size of this site, so I'm just a little concerned about, my wife's a doctor at a nursing home, and she understands the memory care aspect of a nursing home and assisted living where you're providing help for people to walk and get outside, because the key element about memory care is getting people outside and getting some fresh light. So I'm really concerned about that emergency access kind of interjecting in with the walking paths of the memory care patients.
I'll just say you're absolutely correct in everything you said, and that path that'll all be refined, and actually the memory care guardians will be completely contained. They won't be the ones that cross over. That may be the overall path, and again,
the emergency access will not interrupt with the memory care. I totally agree with everything you just said. So they'll be contained and safe in all those ways and develop further as we get into this more. So,
and I just want to end on positive. I think, unfortunately, we have a property owner who's basically forcing the township's hand because of all the police calls, the demolition by basically not maintaining the property. So I commend the fact that you're willing to invest in our community. I appreciate you listening to the neighbors and to the board in creating this facility. And I welcome the assisted living because I'd love to have some people walking through the neighborhood who enjoy West Town and West Goshen. So I do appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Appreciate that. Is there any board questions at this point? There's one prompted to me here. So, these traffic studies, I have a little bit of a healthy skepticism, if you don't mind me saying so, about the accuracy of them and the basis for them. I do believe, and we've gone through this conversation several times during the decision about the zoning for this property. Is there any benefit to a post-implementation traffic study?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Sure. Is there any benefit to a post-construction traffic study on the actual volume that this site is generating? The reason I say is there any benefit is because I'm not sure there's any corrective actions that could be done post it, but if it's off by 50, 60, 70% and the volume is much higher, then it's a piece of information that might be useful. I don't know. What do you think?
It would be a piece of information for you. Again, the proposed use is very different than what is sitting there now. I acknowledge that the existing use is not working at its fullest and highest capacity. Your driver population that will be using this facility will, over a period of time, will become a familiar. It's employees, it's residents, it's the families of the residents. And, can I stand here and say absolutely no one will turn into the lower driveway once? I can't stand here and make that assertion. But it's going to be a regular user base, whereas the current use has a much more, for lack of a better word, a transient base, an unfamiliar. They're one in, they're one out, and then most likely they'll never be back on the site ever again. So developing that user familiarity builds repetition, builds safety. From that, unfortunately, the access options to this site, because of the ramp, to the fully developed to the east, clearly the residents on Walnut do not want another driveway other than an emergency access out to, into their residential neighborhood. So we are limited as to how to safely access and egress the site. Having the two driveways does allow operational flexibility should being as there essentially is functionally one way in and one way out, you have more than one way in and one way out by having the two access points. Should something happen at one of them. Whereas if you have a single access point, then your residents, your employees, everybody is really kind of stuck.
Sean, I would just say too, on a post-development, it only works as a condition if you then say, okay, well, you do the post-development study and it shows much more traffic or an issue, what do they have to do about it?
Yeah,
you have to define that, or else what's the point of doing it? Yeah. And I would say that, during land development, you should be hiring a traffic engineer. We should have our own engineer analyze and critique what's been submitted. Should it include the local crash data? Absolutely. So that's something that I just think that everybody, including the board, should realize that we have that opportunity during land development.
The board appointed McCormick Taylor as the general traffic engineer for the township, so they would review the land development application as part of this process.
Could someone tell me what role PennDOT plays in reviewing the impact to 202 traffic of this? Do they have any role in this process?
No, they would not have any role in this process unless there were a highway occupancy permit that were needed through PennDOT, and I don't believe that would be needed in this case because they're not doing a new road extension out to the PennDOT right away.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board?
I just have one, I guess, last question. What would be, maybe this is for Sam, what would be the policy of the self-storage operator regarding the storage of hazardous materials such as flammable liquids and so forth? Will there be a prohibition of gasoline, kerosene, things of that nature in self-storage?
Yes, there will be in the lease contract.
And that'll be clearly delineated to whomever you take on as an operator?
Correct.
Okay.
These facilities have to be sprinkled, correct?
Yes, they're all sprinkled. Yeah.
I have a question. Will this facility, the self-storage, offer the renting of U-Hauls? I know that often self-storage facilities have some on-site.
It will not.
Okay.
Is there anyone else attending who has not had a chance yet to ask a question or has thought of another question? Yes, this lady here. Would you mind coming up, please?
Hi, my name is Amanda Hart, 935 South Walnut Street. I have notes on my phone, but just to address some of the things that I've heard some of the other residents say tonight, like with the light pollution, I genuinely think it's going to be better than it is now, coming from someone who has bright neon blue lights going in their front window. It's really bad for everyone on our street. The lights are really, really bright. On top of that, I've lived in this house literally since the day I was born, and I remember back when the hotel was popping, everyone was in and out of there, and at the time, the residents were, everyone kind of fought the hotel being built at all. Traffic obviously has gone down, like you had said, because the in and out isn't as much, but there are long-term residents there, whether it's a hotel or not. People stay there nightly, and I have the same guy for the past 6 months that comes to the end of my driveway, sits on my property line, and smokes a lot of weed because the smoke blows right over into my front yard where I have my 1-year-old son playing. So I know that probably about 2 to 3 years ago at this point, I had contacted you guys and I did a Zoom meeting with both of you, and I said that this is not a place where I would ever want my son to grow up, and I didn't even have my son at that point because some nights I'm scared to go out to my car, and I don't want to bring up safety at everyone because I know this is a little more technical when it comes to the traffic and everything, but I feel like just keeping the safety in the back of our minds when, I'm scared to go out at night because we just had a lady who went down to, when the Rite Aid was there, who reported that she was assaulted by like 6 men, and I won't go into the details of what was done to her, but it's pretty gruesome, and I didn't want to go outside at night for about 3 months. I was terrified of the residents because they are long-term. And the current residents there do know the back roads to go out to Matlack because they've been there for months. So I don't think the traffic going through our neighborhood will be really any different than what we have now because they are long-term residents. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to say was like with the traffic going in and out for the sirens, again, it's still a cutback from the police that we have in our neighborhood now, since we have well over 300 calls a year. So 75 sirens, 150 sirens is still better than the 300 some calls that we currently have for dangerous crimes. So that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment or has a question? Okay, so Kristen.
So we can close the evidentiary portion of the hearing. All of your exhibits are fine, they're admitted. The board has 45 days to consider all the testimony and put together a decision. They have to render that decision at a public meeting. So we'll have to figure out when 45 days is, and we'll let everybody know through agendas when that decision will be rendered. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everybody, for attending.